I'm going to be taking you through a few thoughts in this video, sharing a few graphics and exploring an area of real interest. And the reason I'm out here is because of the connection to the actual talk and the significance of looking at our natural laws in relevance to our emotional health and the significance that has for both our mental and physical well-being. My name's Neil Binderman. As you'll see from the slide, I'm the director and founder of the Person-Centered Neurosciences Society and also the Lifestyle Health Foundation. And I wanted to go through, just for the next 30 minutes perhaps in this video, a few thoughts that have arisen that is looking at the significance and the real importance of really the laws of nature. It all started some time ago when I saw a question posted on a medical website, and it was this question: how does CGRP cause migraine? It was the word cause, which is what. And so I'm going to take you through why the answer to that question I believe is I don't think it can. And why is it that I've answered like I have? Well, I think that will become clear. It's also important to look at, with that question, what is CGRP, if they're saying it can cause migraine? Well, it's called calcitonin gene-related peptide in its full. And it's a really important multifunctional neuropeptide. And there are receptors for it that are present on many cell types across the body. But it was this question I actually asked myself, and I want to ask you this question. Why would a multifunctional neuropeptide that your body needs to function as nature intended change into a molecule to cause illness such as a migraine? It doesn't make sense, and it's certainly not neurological. Perhaps we should start to take a fresh look at the definition of etiology. And for migraine, the exact cause is unknown, but it is thought to result from the release of pain-producing inflammatory substances around the nerves and blood vessels of the head. It can be triggered by alcohol and certain foods. That definition of etiology is based on something called the germ theory. But there was an alternative theory, and there's actually growing scientific evidence and research to support the alternative theory that was proposed at the time of the germ theory. And that alternative theory was called the host theory. And it was Bichon in the 19th century who advocated this theory. He actually called it the terrain theory, but we now know it more commonly as the host theory. It's health-centric, and it recognises most pathogens as scavengers, only capable of instigating disease in an unbalanced host. That word unbalanced is a really important word, and we'll come into this video a little more as we go. So with that in mind and that alternative theory, do we need to consider looking at the definition of etiology, especially if our current illness behaviour paradigm is to be transformed into one of wellness? Well, one possible way that we could do that, this has been a bit of fun that I've enjoyed, and one of the ways I've explored this is to change the spelling of the word etiology and to make it etiology like this, because I feel it's more about bringing life to medicine. So what does this term etiology mean? Well, for me, I've put it down like this, that it's the science of emotions and awareness that enable thoughts to come and go. And that together, that feeds wellness by centering the person and empowering the mind and the body to flow and to glow. That's why, for me, emotional health services are needed in centering a person and empowering them to prevent and heal from mental and physical illness, which collectively I've actually titled Acquired Mind Injuries. I've written about that in the past on the Lifestyle Health Foundation website, I believe, just to explain a bit more what that means. But let's start by looking at what an emotion is. Well, according to Wikipedia, which I've adapted slightly, it's a complex experience of consciousness, bodily sensation and behaviour that reflects the personal significance of a thing, an event, or a situation. What is an emotional experience? It's that which can be expressed externally, what you and the person can see, and that which you and the person can feel. That's an internal process. And as these illustrations here are indicating, that includes the likes of your breathing. It also involves changes in blood pressure and heart rate. And that's because emotions and feelings are believed to be made. These are two books which I highly recommend if you've not read them before. How Emotions Are Made by Lisa Feldman Barrett and Permission to Feel by Professor Mark Brackett. Excellent, really interesting reads. But how are those emotions made? Well, it involves a neurochemical process. And where do those chemicals come from? When a person is triggered for the body to be stimulated into performing actions, reactions, and interactions. Well, from the cells in the body, including the brain and the spine, which become associated with a process that changes a person's feeling of physical and mental well-being. And alongside this graphic is a very famous book called Molecules of Emotion, and written by the neuroscientist Candace Pert, who did a lot of her research in the 1970s and is famous for her work in the discovery of the opiate receptor. And those who are not familiar with opiates, that's the likes of morphine, which is used for pain killing. And she went about looking for the receptor using her neurological approach. Her thought about this is expressed in this quote. The only reason that made any sense for an opiate receptor to be in the brain in the first place was if the body itself produced some kind of substance, an organic chemical that fit the tiny keyhole itself, a natural opiate. Well, she went on to discover something that we now know, a term that we're very familiar with called endorphins. The word endorphin is made up of two words, endogenous, which means within the body, morphine, endorphin. So, very, very significant work, well worth reading. But can the nature of those changes vary depending on how receptive a person is in experiencing the emotion? I imagine some of us have had that feeling of embarrassment in the past, or frustration, and perhaps we've not always wanted to express that openly. That's what we mean by whether you're being receptive to wanting to express. But when a person is receptive to trigger, that is on an external and physical level, well then the body is more likely to be receptive at an internal or cellular level. I hope that makes sense. But what if a person's less receptive to a trigger, like very loud music? Well, yes, we can outwardly react on a physical level, and I've certainly done this. I don't know whether anybody else has. But what if there's no conscious action or reaction? Well, I've also experienced something that comes about by being in a nightclub. As you can see, you're hearing and as you'll know, you're hearing changes. So how is that reflected at a cellular level? Well, I believe it's fairly straightforward and simple, in all honesty. If a person is less receptive to the noise, and remember, the body keeps the score, or in my words, the body keeps the natural score. The body keeps the score, as you all know, is a famous book written by the scientist Bessel van der Kolk, and very significantly connected into the world of trauma. So if a person is less receptive, then the body will express fewer receptors. But what happens to those neuromolecules that get released when you're triggered? And remember, when things come, they have to go, like most things in life, possibly like all things in life. But nature is powerful. It requires systems to return to a state of metabolic balance, which we term homeostasis. This is something that happens in nature all the time. As you can see in this graphic, as you're breathing out and breathing in, nature through the trees is breathing in and breathing out to keep us balanced, to keep the whole environment balanced. But how does this happen in the body in terms of rebalancing? Well, I'm going to propose here two possible mechanisms. There is a third, and I'll come to that. The first is that molecules, when they get released, they then have to bind the receptors, excuse me, expressed on the various cells of the body. When they do that, then those molecules will obviously bind and it be internalized, and that concentration of that molecule will come down. The other possible way is if something binds to the molecule that's in the system. How does science know that? Well, what's interesting here is it actually comes about through the research into CGRP. It's the most potent vasodilator peptide known, and vasodilation is a very, very, very important mechanism that the body needs in responding to various stimuli. In terms of blood flow and circulation, that's essential. As it says again, it's multifunctional and it can bind to different cells. It can get transported around the body like other neurochemicals can, including into the brain and spine. And it was in 1979 that Michael Moskovitz discovered an association, the first time, an association between migraine and the trigeminal nerve. It's the largest nerve whose fibers sit on the meninges, which is in the brain, and it's associated with feelings of migraine-like pain. And in 1993, I completed my PhD, and I looked at various areas of the body in connection with CGRP. One of those was in the sciatic nerve, and I found and saw it transported up and down the sciatic nerve. But how can this neuroscience research explain the connection between a person's emotional health and their physical and mental health or well-being? Well, it's actually, again, through this research into migraine, and Professor Peter Goadsby was building on the initial work of Michael Moskovitz in 1979, and this novel approach to migraine treatment was uncovered in 2021 when they all won a major brain prize, and Peter was working on a development of a new treatment. Then I personally became aware of the emotional health significance of the trigeminal nerve through the dental bite plate. How? Well, interestingly, it's through a lived and living experience with a Mr. John Scoons. who is a dentist at Guy's and St Thomas's, and his family, 4 children, of which one of them was my wife, Eleanor Scoones. And it was only recently that I explored that link into why were bite plates given. I know anecdotally through what Eleanor said that it was to help with the grinding, the teeth, and teeth grinding is a significant issue. It is connected with many emotional issues, as you can see in here. So this really opened up some thoughts for me and explored it further. And what was powerful was knowing that John was in the war and we believe had experienced PTSD due to the nature of what he was involved with. So there's a really strong connection and reason for why he wanted his children to have the bite plates. But there is the connection between PTSD with migraine, and the American Headache Society have this on their website, that in a powerful statement, notably PTSD symptoms preceded migraine symptoms in almost 70% of those with migraine and PTSD. But migraineurs report almost twice as many traumatic stresses than those without headache. Another connection is this with PTSD and emotional abuse. This paper is highlighting the effects of parental emotional abuse on the severity and treatment of PTSD symptoms in children and adolescents. But this is an important point about CGRP. As I've said earlier, CGRP must come back down to balance if it's released, because the natural force for all body systems is to return to the state of metabolic balance. So that connection of the emotional health to CGRP homeostasis, that also links back with Professor Peter Goadsby's research work in terms of the new treatments. With colleagues and with the industry, he developed that something that binds to the CGRP. He developed an antibody. Adding in the CGRP antibody then enables it to bind the CGRP, and it seems to then mean that the CGRP is not available to bind on some of the tissues, on some of the cells. Importantly though about that is that the addition of an antibody into there, which is manufactured, therefore is not natural, well, there are implications associated with using that on a long-term basis, which will probably become clear. So I think this paper here is connecting CGRP, migraine, to emotional regulation, or actually, perhaps it's more emotional dysregulation. So a person less receptive to experiencing an emotion that requires CGRP, well, that means the body expresses fewer receptors. Fewer receptors, CGRP levels go up. What else is going to happen to them? To go. But the natural force remains. The natural force is that it must return back to metabolic balance. So there's something going to be fighting with something else here. How is that going to resolve itself? Well, in some cases it's difficult to resolve, and that's what can lead to, in my view, this emotional dysregulation. Because when the levels of CGRP released into the body increase, there is an increased chance that CGRP can bind to receptors not down regulated on various body cells, i.e. those body cells which are not involved in the aspect of the emotion, they stay expressed. So that's important. I should say those receptors stay expressed, in case I didn't. And the CGRP obviously is being released from various nerves around the body for various reasons. What other cells then can CGRP bind to? If that molecule is increasing and there are still receptors available, we need to look at what could it bind to. Well, we know it can bind to mast cells, and this is incredibly recent, 2024. And this finding, obviously, is very significant in unbalancing potentially the immune system also, because of the fact that you're leading to histamine release, and that triggers inflammation, and that therefore will cause other problems. So we know that it binds to the microglia, and the microglia are brain cells. They're a bit like macrophages as well, macrophages being those cells that are key cells as part of your immune system. And interestingly, I found them on macrophage cells when I did my PhD. I found them in the sciatic nerve, interestingly. I also found them in the peritoneum, and that's in the gut, as is the spleen area. So I found them in there too. So back to the question, how does CGRP cause migraine? It can't be the cause, because it is a natural molecule. It's multifunctional, but it's a natural molecule that your body needs to function as nature intended. You remember, you don't get migraine until quite late in life, so that CGRP functions naturally, normally. So why has it changed? Could the untimely release of CGRP be a reason? Well, I hope that you're beginning to see, through what I've expressed and explained, that it could be an emotion. But actually, more importantly, perhaps it's an unpleasant emotion or a memory. Could it actually be rebalanced in a more natural way, a very natural way? This links to the start of the talk and the title. Does the answer to the question lie within Newton's third law of nature? The third law of nature, which I'm sure you will remember, is the law of action and reaction, i.e., for every action, force, in nature, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Well, I've played with that, and I've made up this. For every natural emotion, is there an equal and opposite remotion? That seems to fit so beautifully with everything, and it connects into the laws of nature. I'm going to finish with two of the most common mental well-being related issues, anxiety and depression. I asked a couple of questions in my head in connection to this, and I explored it. One of them was to do with cortisol, and the other one was to do with serotonin, both significantly linked to anxiety, or one to anxiety and one to depression. So the questions were, does too much cortisol cause anxiety? Does too little serotonin cause depression? I think you'll probably know my answer. Why on this earth would they? They are natural molecules that your body needs to function as nature intended. Please, this is incredibly important for me personally, and I hope it has struck you how important this is. We urgently need to look deeper, to uncover and discover, or to see natural approaches that feed human health and well-being. And as you see, the word itself, natural, doesn't exist as far as I'm aware, but I've put it down there as being of nature and real. This is why it's my hope and passion to create emotional health services with an outcome of centering the person to empower them in preventing and healing themselves and others from the physical and mental imbalances triggered by acquired mind injuries.
I hope that it explains exactly why I see the need for emotional health services across the country rather urgently.
Well, I hope you found that useful and it sparked a few thoughts to consider taking forward. Since I recorded that, I actually have discovered some more information, quite remarkably, about CGRP and its potential role in links with other conditions, including schizophrenia. But also, what I found really fascinating was that I seem to have also connected up my own living experience with this, in that I have this tumor in the pineal gland, and just out of curiosity, I searched to look at CGRP and the pineal gland, and I was just gobsmacked when I found that there's been some research done to show that melatonin from the pineal gland can help in terms of bring down levels of CGRP. And not only that, the other day, as some of you know, I posted something up about my connections with the pineal gland and melatonin and schizophrenia. And there seems to be an association there as well. Why? Obviously not known, but it's not the CGRP, remember, that's the problem. It's this untimely release of the molecule that is the problem somehow. So we definitely need to be exploring this in a lot more detail. So it's something to ponder, something for everybody to consider. And I look forward to exploring this as time goes by. So thanks again. And I hope to be able to share other things in the coming months as well. So take care.